The lunch rush at my food truck is the kind of chaos I've learned to love over the past year. All shouted orders and sizzling pans and the rhythm of survival that keeps me from thinking too hard about how far I've fallen from where I used to be. I'm in the middle of flipping 3 burgers simultaneously when the crowd goes quiet in that particular way. That means someone important just walked into the neighborhood. And I don't bother looking up because important people don't eat at sketchy food trucks in forgotten parts of the city unless they're slumming or lost. 2 cheeseburgers, extra onions, and whatever that is you're burning. The voice stops my hand mid-flip, deep and amused and far too familiar for comfort. And I force myself to finish the motion before looking up, because I'll be damned if I let him see that hearing him again after 3 years affects me in any way whatsoever. When I finally meet his eyes across the counter, Dante Carver is leaning against my truck like he owns it, along with everything else in a 5-block radius. Which he probably does, given his family's reputation, and the way everyone around us has suddenly found reasons to be somewhere else. Nothing's burning. Your nose is just too refined for actual food. I plate the burgers I'd been working on, and slide them to my waiting customer without breaking eye contact with Dante, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeming flustered or impressed by his sudden appearance in my extremely unglamorous life. Still sharp as ever. I see 3 years of hiding didn't dull that tongue. His smile is slow and predatory, the kind that used to make my knees weak before I learned better than to fall for dangerous men with empty promises. And though I have to admit, I didn't expect to find you here flipping burgers when you used to complain that cooking was beneath you. Things change, people adapt, and some of us learn to survive without family money or criminal connections to smooth the way. I start assembling his order with quick, efficient movements, muscle memory taking over while my brain tries to process why Dante Carver is standing at my food truck, acting like we're old friends catching up, instead of 2 people who imploded spectacularly and never spoke again. And that sounds almost like an accusation. Are you suggesting I didn't earn my position through hard work and natural charm? I'm suggesting you were born with every advantage and still managed to fuck up the one thing that mattered. But please, tell me more about your natural charm. The words come out sharper than I intended. Years of suppressed anger bleeding through my professional facade, and I watch something flash in his eyes that might be hurt, or might be satisfaction that he still gets under my skin this effectively. He leans forward across the counter, invading my space in that way he always did when he wanted to make a point, and suddenly I can smell his cologne mixing with the grease and smoke of my truck, in a combination that shouldn't work, but somehow does. Oh, still angry then. That's good. Anger means you still feel something. His voice has dropped lower, intimate despite the public setting, and the handful of people still lingering to watch this interaction with barely concealed fascination. I was worried you'd gone completely cold, that you'd erased me as thoroughly as you disappeared. Disappointed I'm not pining away for you. Sorry to damage your ego, but I've been too busy surviving to waste time on nostalgia. I shove his order across the counter with perhaps more force than necessary, suddenly desperate for him to take his food and his smirk and his unwanted presence out of my carefully rebuilt life. That'll be $12. $12. How wonderfully democratic. He pulls out his wallet with exaggerated slowness, making a show of examining the contents like he's never seen cash before. Tell me, does the price include conversation, or is your sparkling personality an upcharge? My sparkling personality is free for customers who don't make me want to spit in their food. You're skating that line pretty hard right now. There she is. There's the woman who used to argue with me for hours just because she enjoyed winning. He hands me a $100 bill with a grin that suggests he knows exactly how annoying this gesture is. I keep the change. Consider it a tip for the entertainment value. I don't need your charity, Dante. Take your money and your ego somewhere else. I try to hand back the bill, but he's already stepping away from the counter, his security detail materializing from wherever they'd been lurking to flank him like he's royalty instead of just another criminal with delusions of legitimacy. What, it's not charity. It's an investment in future conversations. I'll be back tomorrow for lunch. He turns to leave, but pauses, looking back over his shoulder with an expression I can't quite read. And by the way, you might want to move your truck to a different location. This neighborhood is getting dangerous for independent operators without proper protection. The casual threat wrapped in false concern makes my blood run cold because Dante Carver doesn't make suggestions. He makes predictions that inevitably come true through force of will or force of violence. I watch him disappear into a sleek black car that probably costs more than I'll make in 5 years. And only then do I notice the men who'd been watching from across the street, too well dressed and too interested to be casual observers. My next customer approaches cautiously, an older woman who's been coming here since I opened, and she leans in conspiratorially while I prepare her usual order. You know who that was, right? Everyone knows you don't talk to Dante Carver like that unless you want problems. Trust me, I'm very aware of who he is and what kind of problems he brings. Then why'd you mouth off to him like that? You got a death wish or something. Something like that. I hand her the food with a smile that feels brittle. Or maybe I just have a talent for making terrible decisions involving powerful men who should come with warning labels. She leaves, shaking her head at my apparent stupidity. And I'm left alone with my thoughts, and the unsettling certainty that seeing Dante again after 3 years means my carefully constructed peace is about to be shattered beyond repair. The thing is, I'd loved him once with the kind of desperate intensity that makes you stupid and reckless. Back when I thought being with him meant excitement and passion instead of just being an afterthought to his real priorities of power and control. I'd left when I finally accepted that loving Dante Carver meant accepting that I'd always come second to the organization and the empire, and whatever deal was more important than the woman waiting at home. And I'd done it quietly without drama or ultimatums, because I'd known even then that fighting for someone who wouldn't fight for you was the fastest way to destroy yourself. He'd barely noticed I was gone, or at least that's what I'd told myself when weeks passed without contact. And eventually I'd stopped checking my phone and started building this small life that was mine alone. Now he's back with his smirk and his threats disguised as concern. And I can feel the foundation I've built starting to crack under the weight of his attention and the danger that follows him like a shadow. The worst part is the way my body still responds to his proximity. That traitorous spike of awareness when he gets too close. The way my heart rate accelerates when he looks at me with those dark eyes that see too much and forgive nothing. I close up early that night, suddenly paranoid about the men I'd seen watching, and when I get home to my tiny apartment above a convenience store, I find an envelope slipped under my door with no name or return address. Inside is the $100 bill I'd tried to return, and a note in handwriting I recognize immediately, despite years of trying to forget it. Same time tomorrow. I promise the conversation will be worth more than the food. I should throw it away. Should ignore him and hope he gets bored and moves on to his next conquest or crisis. But instead, I find myself reading those words over and over while trying to convince myself that the flutter in my chest is anxiety and not anticipation. This is how it starts. This is how he gets under your skin and into your head until you can't remember why you left in the first place. And I know I should be smarter than to fall for it again. But standing in my small apartment with his note in my hand and his cologne still lingering in my memory, I have the sinking realization that smart has never been my strong suit when it comes to Dante Carver. And 3 years of distance hasn't changed that fundamental truth about who I am and what I want despite knowing better. Tomorrow he'll come back, and I'll serve him with the same sharp tongue and false bravado, and we'll dance around whatever this is until one of us breaks or walks away. The only question is which one it will be this time, and whether I'll survive the answer intact or in pieces. Chapter 2. Humor, Wounds, and Unresolved Past. Dante shows up the next day at exactly noon, which shouldn't surprise me given his obsessive need for control and punctuality. But what does catch me off guard is the fact that he's alone without the usual security detail hovering nearby like expensive, well-dressed shadows. He joins the line like a normal person, or at least his version of normal, which involves everyone around him suddenly finding reasons to move aside and give him space. And I watch him approach with my best customer service smile plastered on, even though my heart is doing complicated things I refuse to acknowledge. Kept you back so soon. Couldn't stay away from my sparkling personality. I'm already reaching for the burger ingredients before he orders, because I remember exactly how he likes everything, despite spending 3 years trying to forget these small, intimate details about his preferences and habits. More like I couldn't stop thinking about that razor-sharp wit and the way you looked at me like you were considering which knife would be most effective for murder. He leans against the counter with casual confidence, watching me work with an intensity that makes my skin prickle with awareness. Besides, you make a decent burger, and the entertainment value of watching you barely restrain yourself from poisoning my food is worth the trip across town. Poisoning would be too obvious. I'm more of a long-game revenge kind of person. I flip his burger with perhaps more aggression than necessary, channeling my frustration into the cooking process. Besides, killing you would just make someone worse take over your territory. At least with you, I know exactly what brand of dangerous I'm dealing with. That almost sounds like a compliment. Should I be flattered that you've thought about my potential successors? You should be concerned that I've thought about you at all. Nothing good comes from me having opinions about your existence. The words hang between us loaded with history and implication, and I watch his expression shift from amused to something more serious. That look he used to get when we'd have our late-night arguments about his priorities and my place in his carefully ordered world. I turn back to the grill because looking at him too long makes me remember things I've worked hard to forget, like the way he used to touch my face when he was trying to apologize without actually saying the words, or how his voice would go soft in those rare vulnerable moments when he'd let his guard down enough to be human instead of just powerful. You know, I looked for you after you left, spent the first 6 months thinking you'd come back once you cooled off and realized leaving was an overreaction. His voice is quieter now, almost conversational despite the weight of what he's admitting. It took me another 6 months to accept you were actually gone and not just making a point. And by then the trail was so cold even my best people couldn't track you down. Maybe that should have told you something about how done I was. People don't disappear that thoroughly unless they're running from something they can't face. I plate his burger with the precision of someone who's done this thousands of times, muscle memory allowing me to function, while my brain processes the fact that he'd actually looked for me instead of just moving on like I'd assumed. Besides, I learned from the best about making myself invisible when it suits my purposes. You learned from me, which means you should know I never actually give up on things I want. I just adjust my strategy until I find a way to win. He takes the plate but doesn't move away, creating a stalemate where we're both too stubborn to back down first. And the question is whether you running counts as winning or just delaying the inevitable. The inevitable being what exactly? You swooping back into my life and expecting me to fall at your feet grateful for the attention. The inevitable being us having the conversations we should have had 3 years ago before you decided ghosting was easier than fighting. I fought for 2 years, Dante. Fought to matter more than your next deal, or your family's expectations, or whatever crisis demanded your attention that day. The anger I've been suppressing bubbles up despite my best efforts to stay professional and detached. Gee, you want to know why I left without fighting? Because I finally realized I was the only one in the ring, and you'd checked out of our relationship so completely you didn't even notice when I stopped trying. His jaw clenches at my words, that telltale sign he's processing something he doesn't want to hear, and for a moment, I think he might actually walk away without the witty comeback or sarcastic deflection that usually serves as his armor against genuine emotion. You're right. I was shit at prioritizing you, and I let the organization consume me until there was nothing left for us. The admission comes out rough, like it physically hurts him to acknowledge failure. But don't pretend you were perfect either. Don't act like you didn't know exactly what my life entailed when you got involved with me in the first place. Knowing what your life entailed and accepting that I'd always be an afterthought are two very different things. I force myself to meet his eyes despite the way my chest is tightening with emotions I don't want to feel. I was naive enough to think love would be enough to make you choose differently, That eventually you'd wake up and realize power and money mean nothing if you're alone at the end of the day. And now, 3 years later, flipping burgers in a neighborhood that's one bad decision away from being a war zone, do you still believe that, or did reality teach you the same lesson it taught me? Reality taught me that depending on someone else for happiness is a recipe for disappointment. So I built something that's mine alone, where the only person who can let me down is me. He's quiet for a long moment, studying me with that unnerving focus that used to make me feel like he could see straight through to all my hidden vulnerabilities and insecurities. And when he finally speaks, his voice carries a weight that makes my stomach clench with something that might be dread or anticipation. You see those two men across the street pretending to read newspapers that are 3 days old. They've been watching your truck since yesterday afternoon and they're not here for the food. I glance over casually, not wanting to make it obvious I'm looking, and spot exactly who he's talking about. 2 guys in suits that don't quite fit right and shoes that are too expensive for this neighborhood. Maybe they're lost tourists with terrible fashion sense. Or maybe they're scouts for the Valentino family who've been trying to expand into this territory and see an unprotected business as an easy mark for establishing their presence. He sets his untouched burger down and shifts his weight, positioning himself subtly between me and the men across the street. You need to close up early today and not come back tomorrow. This location isn't safe anymore. This is my livelihood. I can't just abandon it because you have paranoid fantasies about territory disputes that probably don't involve me. It stopped being paranoid fantasy the moment I showed up yesterday and made it clear. I have an interest in you, which automatically made you a target for anyone wanting to send me a message. His expression has gone cold now, all traces of our verbal sparring replaced by the dangerous man lurking beneath the surface charm. When I'm not asking, I'm telling you to close this truck and disappear until I handle the situation. And there it is. The real Dante Carver coming out to issue commands and expect obedience without explanation or discussion. I cross my arms defensively, refusing to be intimidated even though a small part of me recognizes he might actually be right about the danger. I don't take orders from you anymore. I don't take orders from anyone. So unless you're planning to physically drag me away from my business, you can take your protective instincts somewhere they're actually wanted. Stubborn as ever, some things really don't change. He pulls out his phone and types something quickly before pocketing it again. Fine. Keep the truck open if you're that determined to be difficult. But you're getting security whether you like it or not, because I'm not watching you get hurt to prove a point about independence. I don't need your security. I don't need anything from you except for you to eat your overpriced burger and leave me alone. Too late for that. You stopped being something I could walk away from the moment I saw you again. He picks up his food finally, but instead of leaving, he moves to the small seating area I'd set up with mismatched chairs and an umbrella that's seen better days. I'm eating here today, and I'll be eating here every day until you accept that I'm not going anywhere, regardless of how much attitude you throw at me. This is harassment. I could call the police. The police work for me, but feel free to try if it makes you feel better about the situation. His smile is sharp and unapologetic. Besides, I'm just a customer enjoying excellent food and even better company. Nothing illegal about that. I want to argue, want to tell him exactly where he can shove his protection and his presence. But customers are starting to line up again, and I can't afford to lose business over a personal drama with my dangerous ex, whatever he was. So I turn back to my grill and try to ignore the way he's watching me work. Try to pretend my hands aren't shaking slightly, because having Dante Carver plant himself in my life again feels like standing on the edge of a cliff waiting to fall. The afternoon passes in tense awareness of him sitting there like some kind of well-dressed guard dog. And every time I glance over, he's either eating with obvious enjoyment or studying his phone while somehow still managing to track my every movement. The men across the street disappear around 3 o'clock, which I notice and which Dante definitely notices based on the slight relaxation in his shoulders. When I finally close up at 5, he's still there waiting like he has nothing better to do than monitor my food truck. And when I start the cleanup process, he actually stands up and starts helping without being asked, moving chairs and wiping down tables with the casual competence of someone who's done manual labor before despite his current status. "You don't have to help. I can handle this myself like I have every day for the past year." "I know you can, but I'm helping anyway because standing around watching you work while I do nothing makes me feel useless." He folds the last chair and stacks it with the others. "And besides, we're not done talking, and you can't kick me out if I make myself useful." "We are absolutely done talking. We said everything that needed saying 3 years ago when you made it clear the organization would always come first." "We didn't say anything 3 years ago. You left a note that I never received and disappeared before I could figure out what went wrong." He's standing too close now, invading my space in that deliberate way that makes my pulse race despite my best efforts to stay unaffected. "So no, we're not done. We're actually just getting started on having the conversation you ran away from." "I didn't run. I left with dignity intact, instead of begging for scraps of attention from someone who'd already checked out emotionally." "Then prove you're over it. Prove you don't still feel this thing between us that neither of us has been able to shake despite 3 years and a complete lack of contact." The challenge hangs in the air between us, loaded with dangerous possibility. And I know I should walk away, should tell him to leave and never come back. But instead, I find myself frozen in place while he slowly reaches out and tucks a strand of hair behind my ear with fingers that barely brush my skin, but send electricity shooting through my entire nervous system. "But still here, still not running. Guess that proves something after all." His voice has gone soft and intimate, and he's so close now I can feel his breath against my face. And that's when the first brick comes through my truck window with a note attached that simply says, "Wrong place, wrong protection, leave now." Chapter 3. When danger hits close. The brick lands with enough force to spiderweb the entire passenger window of my truck, and I'm still processing the shock of glass everywhere when Dante's already moving, phone out and barking orders in that cold, efficient voice he uses when violence is imminent and negotiation is off the table. He positions himself between me and the street, with one hand extended back toward me in a gesture that's somehow both protective and possessive, and I find myself automatically taking it, even though my brain is screaming that accepting his help means accepting everything that comes with it. "Marco, I need a team at my location immediately. Also run down everyone who's been surveilling this area in the last 48 hours and find out which family is stupid enough to throw bricks at what's mine." He's scanning the street with predatory focus while keeping me anchored behind him with that grip on my hand that's just shy of painful. "No, I don't care what meeting I'm supposed to be at. Reschedule everything and get here now." "Dante, let go. I need to see how bad the damage is." I try to pull my hand free, but he just tightens his hold, still scanning for threats with that intensity that reminds me exactly how dangerous he is when someone crosses the lines he's drawn. "And you're not going anywhere near that truck until I'm certain whoever threw that brick isn't still around waiting to see if the message was received. It's my truck, my business. I need to assess whether I can still operate or if I'm completely screwed. The reality of what this means for my livelihood is starting to sink in past the shock and adrenaline, and I feel panic rising in my chest because I can't afford repairs, and I definitely can't afford to be shut down while someone fixes what these people broke. You're not operating anything. You're closing this location permanently and letting me set you up somewhere safer until this situation is resolved. He finally looks at me, and something in his expression softens slightly when he sees whatever's showing on my face. I'll cover all the damages and lost income. That's not negotiable. What is negotiable is whether you fight me on the security arrangements or accept them gracefully and save us both the argument. I don't want your money. I don't want to be another responsibility you manage between your actual priorities. You stopped being a responsibility the moment you became the only thing I actually give a shit about protecting. His voice has gone rough with emotion he's barely containing. So yes, you're taking my money and my security and whatever else I decide you need, because the alternative is you getting hurt to prove some point about independence that we both know is just pride disguised as principle. That's not fair. You can't just show up after 3 years and start making decisions about my life like you have any right to an opinion. Fair went out the window when someone threw a brick through your truck because I had lunch here yesterday. He pulls me closer, near enough that I can see the fury and fear warring in his expression. This is on me. You're in danger because I was selfish enough to want to see you again without considering the consequences. So yeah, I'm making decisions about your safety whether you like it or not. A black SUV pulls up before I can respond, disgorging 4 men in suits who move with military precision to secure the perimeter, while one approaches Dante with the kind of deference that makes it clear exactly how high up the food chain he sits. They have a rapid-fire conversation in low voices while I stand there feeling useless and angry and terrified in equal measure, watching my carefully rebuilt life crumble because I couldn't stay away from the one man guaranteed to bring chaos. Boss, we found the kid who threw it. He's being held 2 blocks over waiting for your instructions. Dante's expression goes flat and cold in a way that makes my stomach clench with dread because I know that look. I've seen it before when he's about to do something that can't be undone or forgiven. I'll handle it personally. Get her somewhere secure and make sure the truck is towed to our garage for repairs. Wait, what do you mean you'll handle it personally? What are you going to do to some kid who was probably paid to throw a brick? I grab his arm before he can walk away, because the implications of his words are setting off every alarm I have about exactly how he handles problems in his world. I'm going to have a conversation about respect and consequences. What happens after that depends entirely on whether he gives me the information I need or decides to be difficult. He removes my hand gently but firmly. You don't want details. Trust me on that. You want plausible deniability and the ability to sleep tonight without seeing things you can't unsee. Don't do this. Don't hurt someone because they damaged my truck. It's just glass and metal. It can be replaced. This isn't about your truck. It's about making sure everyone understands what happens when they threaten something I've claimed. His eyes are hard now. All traces of the charming man from earlier replaced by something colder and more primal. You left because you couldn't handle my world. Well, this is my world. And if you're back in my orbit even temporarily, you're going to see exactly what I'm capable of when properly motivated. He walks away before I can argue further, leaving me with his security team who are being politely professional, while also making it crystal clear that I'm not going anywhere without their approval. One of them, a younger guy with kind eyes that seem out of place in this violent context, steps forward with something approaching sympathy in his expression. "Ma'am, if you'll come with me, we have a car waiting to take you somewhere safe while the boss handles the situation. And if I refuse, if I insist on staying here or going home to my own apartment, then I'll have to carry you to the car because my orders were clear, and my life expectancy drops significantly if I let you out of my sight." He says it apologetically, but there's steel underneath that makes it clear he's not bluffing. A boss doesn't make idle threats, and he definitely doesn't tolerate failure when it comes to your safety. So please, for both our sakes, just get in the car voluntarily. I want to fight, want to assert my independence and tell them all exactly where they can shove their protection detail. But the broken window and the very real threat it represents make me swallow my pride and follow him to the waiting vehicle. The interior is leather and luxury, and completely at odds with my food truck operating, bargain shopping lifestyle. And sitting here surrounded by Dante's people in Dante's car, heading to somewhere Dante has deemed safe, makes me feel like I'm being absorbed back into a world I'd escaped at great personal cost. The apartment they take me to is in a building so upscale it has actual doormen and security cameras in the elevator. And when we reach the penthouse floor, I realize with sinking certainty that this is Dante's personal space, the place where he lives when he's not managing his empire or breaking people who cross him. The security guy, who'd been almost kind, opens the door and gestures for me to enter, and I find myself in a living space that's all modern lines and expensive taste with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city I'd been scraping by in while he'd been living like this. A boss said to make yourself comfortable. He'll be back within the hour to check on you. And if I want to leave before he gets back, then I'd have to respectfully prevent that from happening, ma'am. He positions himself by the door with the kind of casual readiness that suggests he's absolutely prepared to follow through on that threat. And there's food in the kitchen and the bathroom is down the hall if you need anything. I'll be right here if you have questions. So I'm trapped, held captive by a man who thinks protection and possession are the same thing. And the worst part is the traitorous piece of me that's relieved to have someone else making decisions and shouldering responsibility, even if it means surrendering the independence I'd fought so hard to achieve. I move to the windows because standing still feels like accepting defeat, and I look out over the city while trying to figure out how I went from flipping burgers in relative peace to being locked in Dante Carver's penthouse waiting for him to return from doing violence on my behalf. My phone rings and I answer without checking the caller ID, because anything is better than standing here drowning in my own thoughts about how quickly everything fell apart. And you're at his place, which means you're already half back in his world whether you want to admit it or not. The voice is female and vaguely familiar. Someone from my past life before I'd run away from everything connected to Dante. Just thought you should know, the Valentino family isn't working alone. They have backing from someone high up who wants Dante distracted and off balance, and you're the perfect weapon to accomplish both. Who is this? How did you get my number? Someone who remembers when you were smart enough to run from dangerous situations instead of walking back into them voluntarily. The line goes dead before I can ask anything else, and I'm left staring at my phone trying to process this new information and what it means for the danger I'm apparently neck-deep in whether I chose it or not. Chapter 4. The War Begins. Dante returns an hour later, looking exactly like someone who's just done terrible things and feels no remorse about it whatsoever. And there's blood on his knuckles that he hasn't bothered to clean off, because I think he wants me to see it, wants me to understand exactly what he's capable of when protecting what he considers his territory or his people. He dismisses the guard with a nod and locks the door behind him with deliberate slowness. and suddenly the spacious penthouse feels too small to contain both of us, and all the unspoken tension crackling between us like electricity before a storm. And before you start lecturing me about violence and morality, you should know the kid gave up his employer within 5 minutes and confirmed what I already suspected, which is that the Valentino family is making a move into this territory, using your truck as the opening gambit. He moves to the bar and pours himself 3 fingers of whiskey like we're having a casual conversation instead of discussing the aftermath of what I can only assume was torture or something equally brutal. They thought hitting an unprotected business connected to me would send a message about their strength and my weakness. They were extremely wrong about both assumptions. You hurt that kid. I can see it on your hands. I can see it in the way you're standing like violence is just another Tuesday for you. I'm trying to keep my voice steady, even though seeing the evidence of what he's done makes my stomach churn with a complicated mix of horror and something darker I don't want to examine too closely. I did what was necessary to get information and send a message back to the people threatening you. And yes, it involved violence, because that's the only language certain people understand in this world. He downs the whiskey in one smooth motion and sets the glass down with controlled precision. You want me to apologize for keeping you safe? Want me to feel bad about hurting someone who was part of a plan to intimidate or possibly harm you? But I can't do that because I'd do it again in a heartbeat if it meant protecting what's mine. I'm not yours. We haven't been anything to each other for 3 years. You don't get to claim me and make violent decisions on my behalf just because you decided you want back in my life. You became mine again the moment I saw you at that truck. Maybe you were always mine even during those 3 years when I couldn't find you and you couldn't forget me. He moves closer with that predatory grace that used to make my knees weak, and still does despite my best efforts to stay unaffected. And whether you want to admit it or not, you need me right now because the danger isn't going away just because you wish it would. It's escalating because the Valentinos see an opportunity to hit me where I'm vulnerable. Then they're idiots because I'm not your vulnerability. I'm just someone you used to know who happens to run a food truck in the wrong neighborhood. You keep telling yourself that while I deal with the reality of the situation, which is that you're in danger because of your connection to me, and the only way to keep you alive is to make it abundantly clear that touching you means declaring war. I got a call while you were out breaking people. Someone who knew I was here, knew about the Valentino plan, said they're not working alone and that I'm being used as a weapon to distract you. I watch his expression shift from frustrated to coldly furious in the span of a heartbeat. So congratulations. Your dramatic rescue and protective instincts are playing exactly into someone's hands. What number? Give me your phone right now. He's across the room before I can blink, hand extended in a command that brooks no argument, and I find myself handing it over because the intensity radiating off him suggests fighting would be both pointless and possibly dangerous. He scrolls through my recent calls with a focus that's almost frightening, and when he finds what he's looking for, his jaw clenches hard enough that I can see the muscle jumping beneath his skin. Valentina fucking Russo. I should have known she'd be involved in this. She's been trying to undermine me for months, and using you as leverage is exactly the kind of move she'd make. Who's Valentina, and why does she hate you enough to drag innocent people into whatever grudge she's nursing? She's my father's goddaughter, and she thinks she should be running the organization instead of me. Also, we had a brief thing years ago that ended badly, and she's the type to hold grudges until everyone involved is dead or destroyed. He throws my phone onto the couch with barely controlled violence, And she must have been watching you for weeks, waiting for me to make contact so she could use our connection against me. And I walked right into it by showing up at your truck like an idiot with no concept of strategic thinking. So what now? You hide me here forever while you have a war with your ex and her allies? Or do I get a vote in how my life is completely upended by your drama? Now I end this before it gets worse. Before they escalate from property damage to actual violence aimed at you specifically. He's pacing now. That restless energy that signals his brain working through strategies and contingencies. You're staying here where I can protect you. I'm doubling security on this building, and I'm having a conversation with Valentina that will make it very clear what happens to people who threaten my people. Your people, like I'm some kind of asset to be managed instead of a person with agency and opinions about being used as a chess piece in your power games. You want agency? Fine, here's your agency. You can stay here willingly and accept my protection while I handle this situation, or you can fight me every step of the way and still end up here because I'm not giving you the option to be vulnerable and exposed. He stops pacing and looks at me with something raw and almost desperate beneath the cold control. I failed you 3 years ago by not prioritizing you properly, by letting you feel secondary and unimportant, but I'm not failing you now when your safety is actually on the line and the consequences of my inaction could be your death. So my choices are stay here as your prisoner or stay here as your willing captive. Those are fantastic options that really respect my autonomy. Your choices are trust that I know how to handle threats in my world, or walk out that door and see how long you survive without protection in a territory that's suddenly become a war zone with you as the prize. The truth in his words hits harder than I want to admit because he's right. I have no idea how to navigate this kind of danger, and pretending I can handle it alone would be suicidal stupidity disguised as independence. I sink onto his expensive couch and put my head in my hands because the weight of everything that's happened in the last 2 hours is suddenly crushing, and I feel his presence before he actually touches me. That awareness I've always had of exactly where he is in any space we share. I'm not trying to control you. I'm trying to keep you alive long enough for us to have the conversations we should have had before you left. His hand is gentle on my shoulder, thumb stroking in small circles that are probably meant to be comforting, but just make me more aware of how much I've missed his touch. Let me handle the danger. Let me be good at the one thing I'm actually competent at, and then we can go back to arguing about everything else once the threat is neutralized. And if I can't handle watching you be the violent, dangerous man you are, if seeing what you're capable of makes me realize I was right to leave in the first place, then at least you'll be alive to make that decision instead of dead, because you were too proud to accept help from someone who's very good at keeping people safe. Chapter 5. Forced Proximity and Uncomfortable Truths. 3 days of living in Dante's penthouse feels like 3 years of forced intimacy and unresolved tension. Every interaction loaded with the weight of our history and the dangerous chemistry that never quite died despite time and distance and all my efforts to convince myself I was over him. He works from home now instead of going to his office because leaving me here alone apparently violates some protective instinct he can't override. Which means I'm treated to the sight of him in casual clothes taking calls that range from legitimate business to thinly veiled threats. Watching him shift between charming businessman and cold enforcer with the ease of someone who's been playing these roles his entire life. You're staring again. If you have something to say, just say it, instead of boring holes through my head with your eyes. He doesn't look up from his laptop where he's been reviewing what appears to be contracts, or possibly hit lists for all I know about his actual business operations. I'm not staring. I'm observing. There's a difference. I'm curled up on the opposite end of his massive sectional, with a book I'm not actually reading because paying attention to words is impossible, when he's in the same room radiating that particular brand of controlled danger that makes my pulse race. Observing implies detachment and clinical interest. What you're doing is definitely staring with a healthy dose of either hatred or lust. I can't quite tell which. He closes the laptop finally and turns to face me fully, and the intensity of his focus makes me feel pinned like a butterfly under glass. Though based on the way you've been avoiding being alone with me in any room smaller than this one, I'm guessing it's lust disguised as hatred because that's safer to admit. Your ego really is staggering. Not every woman who looks at you is secretly pining away with desperate longing. No, but you are. And we both know it because the same thing that's driving you crazy is driving me insane. Which is the fact that we're living together in forced proximity while pretending we don't still want each other exactly as much as we did 3 years ago. Wanting someone and being good for them are completely different things. We were terrible together. We made each other miserable. We were terrible because I was an idiot who didn't know how to balance my responsibilities with my relationship. And you were too proud to tell me directly that you needed more instead of just slowly withdrawing until there was nothing left. He stands and moves closer with that deliberate grace that suggests he's done giving me space to hide from this conversation. But we're older now, and theoretically wiser. And maybe this time we could actually figure out how to not destroy each other, while still getting what we both clearly want. And what exactly do we both want in your expert assessment of the situation? Each other, naked and honest, and without all the walls we've built to protect ourselves from getting hurt again. He's standing directly in front of me now, close enough that I have to tilt my head back to maintain eye contact, and the heat radiating off him makes my skin prickle with awareness. When I've wanted you since the moment I saw you again at that truck, wanted to drag you out of there and keep you somewhere safe where I could look at you and talk to you and remember why I spent 3 years trying to forget you existed. That's not want, that's possession. You want to own me like you own everything else in your carefully controlled world. Maybe it started as possession, but it evolved into something more complicated when you opened your mouth and reminded me that you're the only person who's ever challenged me without fear or ulterior motive. His hand comes up to cup my face with a gentleness that contradicts the intensity in his eyes. I missed you. Missed arguing with you and laughing with you, and the way you'd look at me like I was capable of being better than what I was born to be. Dante, we can't do this. We can't fall back into old patterns and expect different results. My voice comes out shakier than I want because his thumb is stroking my cheekbone and my body is remembering exactly how good his hands feel on my skin. But then we'll make new patterns, set boundaries, and communicate, and actually try to build something sustainable instead of just burning hot and fast until we implode. Before I can argue or agree or do anything rational, his phone rings with a tone that makes his entire body tense, and he releases me to answer it with a curt greeting that signals this is business of the dangerous variety. I watch his expression shift from frustrated desire to cold calculation as he listens to whoever's on the other end, and when he speaks, his voice has gone deadly quiet in that way that makes my stomach clench with dread. When did this happen? How many people know? And what's the current threat level? He's pacing now, that restless, predatory movement that signals he's planning violence or strategy, or probably both. And I find myself standing because sitting still while he's clearly receiving bad news feels impossible. I want everyone we have on this. I want her location locked down tighter than the Federal Reserve. And I want a list of everyone who's been asking questions or showing interest in the last 72 hours. The her he's referring to is clearly me based on the way he keeps glancing over to make sure I'm still here and safe. And the fear in his eyes when he thinks I'm not looking is almost worse than the anger because Dante Carver doesn't do fear unless something is genuinely catastrophic. He ends the call and stands there for a long moment with his back to me, shoulders rigid with tension. And when he finally turns around, his expression is carefully controlled in that way that means he's about to tell me something I absolutely don't want to hear. Your name is circulating in the underground. Valentina made sure everyone knows you're my weakness, and that hurting you would be the fastest way to destabilize my control and create opportunities for ambitious families to move against me. So I went from running a food truck in obscurity to being a target for every criminal with a grudge against you. That's just fantastic. It's worse than that. The bounty she's put on information about you is high enough that people who've never met you are suddenly very interested in your daily routine and habits. He moves back to me with purpose, hands gripping my shoulders like he's physically holding me in place through force of will. Now, I need you to understand the severity of this situation. You can't leave this penthouse without a full security detail. You can't contact anyone from your old life, and you definitely can't go back to that truck or that apartment or anything connected to your life before I found you again. You're saying I'm essentially a prisoner here for the foreseeable future while you wage war against your ex-girlfriend and whoever else wants to use me as leverage. I'm saying you're under my protection whether you like it or not, and the alternative to being a comfortable prisoner here is being an uncomfortable corpse somewhere else. The bluntness of his words hits like a slap, stripping away any illusion that this is anything other than life or death serious, and I feel the weight of my situation settling over me like a suffocating blanket. How long? How long do I have to hide here while you handle this threat that exists because you couldn't stay away from my truck? As long as it takes to eliminate everyone who sees you as an opportunity, and before you start blaming me for the danger. Remember that I warned you this neighborhood was getting unsafe, and you chose to ignore that warning because accepting my help felt like admitting I was right. So this is my fault now. I'm responsible for being targeted because I had the audacity to try surviving independently without your intervention. This is both our faults, mine for being selfish enough to want you back in my life, and yours for being stubborn enough to refuse protection when you knew there were risks. He pulls me closer, and suddenly we're pressed together from chest to thigh, with his hands spanning my waist, and his face close enough that I can see the gold flecks in his dark eyes. But we're in it now, and the only way forward is together. So stop fighting me on every decision and start trusting that I know how to keep you alive in my world. And when the danger passes, assuming we both survive, what then? Do we just go back to our separate lives and pretend this forced proximity didn't happen? When the danger passes, we figure out if what we have is real or just adrenaline and unresolved feelings. But right now, survival takes priority over relationship analysis. His mouth is so close to mine that I can feel his breath against my lips, and the temptation to close that final distance and kiss him is almost overwhelming, despite every logical reason I have to maintain boundaries and protect myself from getting hurt again. This is a terrible idea. The best ones usually are. He kisses me before I can talk myself out of it, and suddenly 3 years of separation and all my carefully constructed defenses dissolve under the onslaught of his mouth on mine, and his hands pulling me closer like he's trying to fuse us together. The kiss is everything I remember, and somehow more intense, desperate and demanding, and full of all the things we haven't said to each other. And when we finally break apart, we're both breathing hard and staring at each other, like we can't quite believe what just happened. And we shouldn't have done that. Probably not, but I'm not sorry we did. Chapter 6. The Price of Loving a Monster. The kiss changes everything and nothing simultaneously, creating a tension between us that's somehow both resolved and amplified, because now we both know exactly what we're denying ourselves every time we're in the same room, pretending the attraction doesn't exist. Dante throws himself into managing the security situation, with an intensity that borders on obsessive, taking calls at all hours, and having hushed conversations with Marco that stop abruptly whenever I enter the room. And I know he's keeping things from me, but I can't decide if I'm grateful for the protection or furious about being treated like I'm too fragile to handle the truth. It's on the 5th night when I wake up to raised voices coming from his office, and I find myself creeping down the hallway in one of his t-shirts that I'd borrowed because my limited wardrobe ran out days ago and he'd insisted I help myself to whatever I needed from his closet. The door is cracked open just enough that I can hear without being seen, and what I hear makes my blood run cold with a combination of fear and fury that takes my breath away. They're offering a truce if you cut ties with her completely, exile her somewhere they can't reach, and make it clear she means nothing to you beyond a temporary distraction. That's Marco's voice, steady and pragmatic, like he's discussing a business merger instead of my potential banishment. And if I refuse their generous offer to spare her life in exchange for abandoning her to fend for herself? Dante's voice is laced with sarcasm, but there's something underneath it that sounds almost like he's considering the proposition. And then they escalate. They've made it clear that her continued presence in your life is unacceptable, and they're prepared to make examples that will force your hand one way or another. Define examples. Spell out exactly what they're threatening, so I can make an informed decision about whether their posturing has any actual teeth behind it. They're threatening to go after other people you care about, your sister specifically, and they've implied that collateral damage is acceptable if it achieves their goal of destabilizing your control. The silence that follows is heavy with implication, and I find myself holding my breath, waiting to hear what Dante will say. Whether he'll choose me, or his family, or some third option I can't predict, because he's always been better at strategic thinking than I've given him credit for. I tell them I'll consider their terms, that I need 48 hours to arrange transportation and ensure she's settled somewhere safe before I make the formal announcement about cutting ties. My heart drops into my stomach at his words because even though I know logically that this might be strategy rather than genuine agreement, hearing him discuss exiling me like I'm a problem to be solved instead of a person he claims to care about brings back every insecurity I had during our relationship about being secondary to his real priorities. Boss, you're not seriously considering giving in to their demands. You don't negotiate with threats. That's been your policy since you took over. My policy is survival and protecting what matters. And right now, what matters is making sure both she and my sister live through this power play without becoming casualties of Valentina's ambition. There's something in his tone that I can't quite read. Some undercurrent that suggests he's not being entirely honest even with Marco about his actual plans. I don't wait to hear more because I've heard enough, heard him agree to send me away and heard him prioritize his sister's safety over my presence in his life. And the betrayal cuts deeper than it probably should given that we're not actually together, and he's technically just being practical about threat management. I'm back in the bedroom packing the few things I'd accumulated during my stay here before my brain catches up with my emotions, operating on pure hurt and wounded pride that won't let me stay somewhere I'm clearly not wanted beyond temporary convenience. Where exactly do you think you're going at 3 a.m. with a bag full of my clothes? Dante's voice from the doorway makes me jump, and when I turn around, he's leaning against the frame with his arms crossed, and an expression that's equal parts amused and concerned. Anywhere that isn't here, anywhere that doesn't involve being discussed like cargo that needs shipping to a convenient location. I shove another shirt into the bag with more force than necessary. You were going to ship me off somewhere without even telling me to my face. We're just going to arrange my exile and present it as a done deal. You were eavesdropping on a conversation you didn't have context for, and jumped to conclusions about my intentions. He moves into the room with that predatory grace, closing the distance between us before I can retreat. I'm not exiling you. I'm buying time to set a trap for everyone who thinks they can dictate my personal life through threats and intimidation. That sounded remarkably like agreement to their terms. That sounded like you prioritizing your sister over me, which is fine because she's family, and I'm just the ex you couldn't stay away from. That was me telling them what they wanted to hear, so they'd relax their guard while I arrange for their permanent removal from the equation. His hands come up to grip my shoulders, forcing me to look at him instead of continuing my frantic packing. But I'm not giving you up. I'm not sending you away. I'm using their own strategy against them by appearing to comply while actually preparing to eliminate the threat entirely. And your sister. Were you lying about her being in danger, or is that actually true, and I'm the catalyst for putting her at risk? She's safe. I moved her to a secure location 3 days ago the moment Valentina's name came up, because I know how she operates, and family is always her first move when she wants leverage. He pulls me closer, despite my resistance. But I let Marco and everyone else think I'm conflicted about the choice, because if they believe I'm considering exile, then our enemies will believe it too, and lower their defenses accordingly. This is exhausting, keeping track of your schemes and strategies and trying to figure out what's real versus what's performance for some larger game I don't understand. Welcome to my world. Everything is strategy and performance, and trying to stay 3 moves ahead of people who want what you have. His voice softens slightly. But this, yes, what I feel when I'm with you, that's real. That's the one thing in my life that isn't calculated or tactical. How am I supposed to trust that when you're literally admitting you lie to everyone, including your own people, to achieve your goals? Because I could have actually sent you away for your safety and chosen the easier path of removing you from the equation. But instead, I'm keeping you here, and fighting a war on multiple fronts to make sure you don't have to leave. His logic is sound even if I hate admitting it, and I feel my anger deflating into something more complicated that includes fear and frustration, and the unwanted realization that he's taking significant risks to keep me in his life despite the danger and complications it creates. I can't live like this, constantly second-guessing what's true and what's strategy, wondering if the person I'm falling for actually exists, or if he's just another role you play. Then ask me, When you're unsure or scared, or think I'm playing games, ask me directly, and I'll tell you the truth even when it's ugly or inconvenient. He's so close now that I can feel his heart beating, can see the sincerity in his eyes that might be genuine, or might be the most convincing performance yet. And I'm not perfect, and I'm definitely not good. But I'm trying to be honest with you in ways I've never been with anyone else. Prove it. Tell me something true that you don't want to admit. Something that makes you vulnerable instead of just strategically positioned. He's quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing what to reveal versus what to keep hidden. And when he finally speaks, his voice is raw with emotion. He's barely containing. I'm terrified I'm going to get you killed. That my selfishness in wanting you back in my life is going to put you in a situation I can't protect you from. And the guilt of that possibility is eating me alive even as I refuse to let you go. The admission hits harder than any declaration of love could because it's messy and honest, and exactly the kind of vulnerable truth I'd demanded. And I find myself reaching up to touch his face before I consciously decide to bridge the distance between us. I'm terrified too. Terrified of trusting you again, and terrified of walking away and wondering what if for the rest of my life. Then stay terrified with me. Let's both be scared and honest and figure this out together instead of running from it separately. He kisses me before I can overthink my way out of this decision. And this time there's desperation in it that wasn't present before, like he's trying to convince both of us that this is worth the risk, and the fear and the very real danger surrounding us. Chapter 7. Final Choice. The attack comes 36 hours into Dante's fabricated compliance with the exile demands. Right when our enemies think they've won and he's arranging my departure. Which is exactly when he wanted them to strike, because confident enemies make mistakes, and Dante Carver has built his entire empire on capitalizing on other people's errors in judgment. I'm in the kitchen making coffee, because pretending life is normal helps manage the anxiety of knowing I'm living in a war zone when the windows explode inward with enough force to send me diving behind the marble counter. And suddenly, there are men in tactical gear pouring through the shattered glass like some kind of nightmare made flesh. Dante appears from nowhere, moving with lethal precision. And I watch in horrified fascination as he transforms from the man who kisses me with desperate tenderness into something cold and efficient and absolutely terrifying in its controlled violence. He's armed with weapons I didn't know he kept in the penthouse, taking down attackers with the kind of brutal competence that speaks to years of training and practice. And part of me is screaming to look away while another part can't stop watching him defend what's his with single-minded determination. Stay down. Don't move until I tell you it's safe. His voice cuts through the chaos with absolute authority. And I find myself obeying instinctively because this is his world and his expertise, and I have no idea how to survive this kind of violence without his guidance. The fight is over in less than 5 minutes, leaving bodies and blood and shattered glass everywhere. And when Dante comes back to me, there's a gash on his arm that's bleeding heavily, and a look in his eyes that's equal parts fury and relief. Are you hurt? Did any of them touch you? His hands are on me before I can answer, checking for injuries with a thoroughness that would be clinical if not for the way his hands are shaking slightly with adrenaline or fear or possibly both. I'm fine, I'm not hurt, but you're bleeding and we should probably call for medical help or police or something. My voice sounds distant and strange even to my own ears. shock setting in now that the immediate danger is past and my brain is trying to process what just happened. No police, no hospitals. I have people who handle this kind of thing discreetly. He's already on his phone giving orders in that clipped efficient tone. And within minutes the penthouse is swarming with his people who are cleaning up bodies. And evidence like this is just another Tuesday in the criminal underworld. But you need to pack everything. We're moving to a more secure location until I finish handling Valentina and everyone who thought attacking my home was an acceptable strategy. Dante, you're losing a lot of blood. You need medical attention before you start planning your next move. I grab his uninjured arm, because he looks like he's about to pass out from blood loss, even as he's trying to manage the aftermath and organize our departure. Now I've had worse. This is nothing. But his face is pale, and he sways slightly when Marco appears with what looks like a serious medical kit, clearly prepared for exactly this kind of emergency. Boss, you need to let me stitch that before you bleed out trying to be tough in front of your girl. Marco's tone is respectful, but firm. The voice of someone who's been dealing with Dante's stubborn refusal to acknowledge weakness for years. Bean's fine, but make it fast. We need to be out of here in 20 minutes before they send reinforcements or decide to escalate further. I watch Marco work on Dante's arm, with efficient precision, while trying not to think about how close we came to much worse outcomes. And when Dante catches me staring, he reaches out with his good hand to pull me closer, despite Marco's protests about needing him to stay still. I told you I'd keep you safe. Told you I knew how to handle threats in my world. You also nearly died protecting me. That's not exactly the reassuring victory you think it is. But I didn't die. We're both alive, and the people who tried to hurt you are very definitively not, which means I won and they lost. His grip on my hand tightens. This is what loving me looks like. This is the reality of being connected to someone who solves problems with violence and makes enemies just by existing. And if you can't handle it, then you need to tell me now before we get any deeper into this. I can handle it. I don't like it. And it terrifies me. And I wish your world was different. But I can handle it if it means being with you. The admission comes out before I can second-guess myself into taking it back. But you need to promise me something. Promise that you'll stop trying to protect me from the truth and start including me in decisions that affect my safety and my life. Done. No more secrets about threats or strategies. I'll tell you everything even when it's ugly or scary. Marco finishes the stitching and steps back with a look that suggests he thinks we're both insane, but he's not paid to have opinions about his boss's romantic choices. Boss, the car is ready and the safe house is prepared. We should move before someone notices the cleanup crew. The safe house turns out to be a fortified compound 2 hours outside the city. All high walls and armed guards and security systems that would make a paranoid dictator feel inadequate. And as we pull through the gates, I realize this is Dante's final line of defense, the place he retreats to when everything else fails. He keeps me close as we enter the main house, his injured arm around my waist like he's afraid I'll disappear if he lets go. And when we're finally alone in what's clearly the master suite, he pulls me onto the bed and just holds me for several minutes without speaking. When I thought I was going to lose you, when those windows exploded and I couldn't see where you were, I thought I'd failed and you were gone. His voice is muffled against my hair, but I can hear the emotion thick in his throat. I would have burned down the entire city to get revenge if they'd succeeded. but they didn't. I'm here and I'm safe because you kept your promise about protecting me. I pull back enough to see his face, to make him look at me instead of hiding in my shoulder. Now you need to keep your other promise about ending this threat permanently, so we can figure out what we're building without constantly looking over our shoulders. Valentina made a mistake by attacking us here, by showing her hand and exposing her allies. His expression shifts from vulnerable to coldly calculating. Han, I know everyone involved now, and by this time tomorrow, none of them will be in a position to threaten you or anyone else ever again. What are you going to do? What I should have done weeks ago when this started. I'm eliminating the problem at its source and making sure everyone understands what happens when they target what's mine. He kisses me then, deep, and claiming and full of promise that feels both romantic and vaguely threatening in the way only Dante can manage. And when we break apart, we're both breathing hard and staring at each other like we're trying to memorize this moment before everything changes again. When this is over, when Valentina and her allies are handled and the danger passes, we're going to have a very long conversation about what comes next for us. I'm counting on it. 2 weeks later, the food truck is gone, destroyed beyond repair in what Dante's people are calling an unfortunate accident. But what I know was actually him, making sure I could never go back to that life even if I wanted to. He's bought me a restaurant space in a neighborhood he controls completely, set me up with equipment and staff and everything I'd need to build something legitimate and safe, and I'm standing in the empty space trying to decide if I'm grateful or resentful about having my choices made for me even when they're objectively good choices. You hate it. I can tell by the way you're standing there looking like I bought you a prison instead of a business opportunity. Dante appears in the doorway looking healthier than he did 2 weeks ago. The wound on his arm healing cleanly, and his enemies eliminated with the kind of thorough brutality that made the news, even if the details were carefully sanitized. I don't hate it. I'm just processing the fact that my entire life has been restructured around your ability to protect me rather than my own choices and preferences. You could have said no, could have insisted on finding your own space and building something without my involvement. He moves closer with that confidence that comes from knowing exactly how this conversation will end. But you didn't, because you know I'm right about the safety concerns, and you're finally accepting that being with me means accepting a certain level of control over your security. I'm accepting that loving you means compromising on independence, but that doesn't mean I'm happy about it. Loving me, that's the first time you've said it out loud. His smile is slow and satisfied. Say it again. I love you. I hate that I love you, and I definitely hate how much I've had to change my life to accommodate your particular brand of dangerous affection. But I love you. I love you too. Have loved you since the moment you opened your mouth at that food truck and reminded me why I couldn't forget you for 3 years. He pulls me into his arms carefully, mindful of his healing injury. And I promise to try to be less controlling and more communicative about decisions that affect you. Trying is all I ask. We stand there in my new empty restaurant holding each other, while outside his guards keep watch, and his enemies stay buried, and the world he's built continues spinning around us. This isn't the happy ending I imagined back when I thought love was simple and danger was something that happened to other people. But it's real, and it's ours, and maybe that's enough. I survived falling in love with the most dangerous man in the city. Now I just have to survive building a life in the world he created, where violence is currency and protection is love, and every day is a calculated risk I'm choosing to take. Because walking away would be safer, but it wouldn't be living. And I'm done just surviving. The end.